Great. So thanks very much for joining us. Just to kind of let you know who's on, it's myself, I'm Helen Jung, the opinion editor. Laura Gunderson, Amy Wong, and Therese Bottomley are also on, and we're joined by Commissioner Chloe Eudaly and Mingus Mapps, as well as Sam Adams. Thanks for making time to be with us today to talk a little bit about your candidacies. And hopefully if we can just start off by, just a quick 1 or 2 minute introduction about who you are, why you're running, and why you're the best candidate. And let's go in alphabetical order. So Sam, would you like to go first?
Sure. Sam Adams. My background is in public service, working for Lane County as an intern for the state legislature, then for Vera Katz in various positions for almost 20 years. Member of the City Council and mayor in the Great Recession. I'm running because even before the pandemic, I felt that Portland was letting challenges get beyond its reach for meaningful solutions, and that the connection with city government was frayed and broken. Now, the issues that we faced before the pandemic, houselessness, homelessness, transportation, transit congestion, cuts to the city, support for small businesses, which has been my agenda. Those challenges are even made more dire by the pandemic. So I've transformed my campaign into an advocacy campaign about 4 weeks ago because I know early decisions made right can have a significant sort of bearing on what happens next. So I'm running with hands-on experience of having worked, led the city through a number of difficult times, and including the Great Recession, where I overcut the budget to have $42 million for housing and homeless services, fast-tracked hundreds of millions of dollars and already paid for, but a couple of years out, construction projects to keep people working. These are the hands-on experience that I have that I think is a unique proposition in this race. Thanks.
And Chloe, if you wouldn't mind going next.
Thank you. Hi, yeah, my name is Chloe Eudaly. I'm running for re-election to position number 4. Born and raised in the Portland area, grew up in a working class family, left school and home fairly young to strike out on my own. I opened a business at age 24, which was a alternative press specialty bookshop, which I ran for 22 years up until 3 days before I took office. I have been engaged in activism and advocacy around a variety of social, economic, and environmental issues over the last 30 years. But my primary focus in the last several years has been disability rights and housing justice. I barely squeaked through the last recession with my small business and keeping a roof over my head. I didn't receive any assistance from the city, and I also received no relief as an increasingly cost-burdened renter. And it was in my involvement in the housing justice movement, which my involvement began around 5 years ago. The movement's certainly been around a lot longer than that, that led me to run for city council. It had been open season on Portland renters for 30 years since the legislature passed a ban on rent control and a prohibition on no-cause evictions. And in the midst of a housing crisis, we were seeing price gouging and profiteering from landlords. So in the first 30 days I was in office, I passed the strongest tenant protection Portland has seen in our lifetime. I've continued to do work in that arena as it's a vital part of our overall strategy to address our housing crisis. And I look forward to doing a lot more. Thank you.
And Mingus, if you wouldn't mind going.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Mingus Mapps, candidate for Portland City Council, position number 4. I appreciate having this opportunity to talk to you today and to introduce myself to you. I am I'm a longtime Portlander. I'm a dad. I'm a Democrat. I'm a scholar, and I'm a public servant. I did my undergraduate work at Reed College in political science, and then later on, I went on to get my PhD in government from Cornell University. I've split my career between being a scholar and professor who teaches and researches on issues surrounding urban politics and public policy. And I have also been a public servant here in Portland. Most recently, for example, I was the program manager for the city's neighborhood association system. I was also a supervisor for the city's crime prevention program. For those of you who have been around for a long time, back when Bev Sang was in Multnomah County Chair, I worked in her office. I've also worked for Portland Public Schools in their Intergovernmental Relations Office, where I was down in Salem lobbying for adequate funding for our school kids. And I've been executive director for Historic Park Bros, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting equitable economic development east of 82nd. Now, all of those experiences have taught me a lot about how Portland works and has taught me a lot about what doesn't work about Portland and has given me some ideas about how to make our city better. So and that's why I want to get into this race, is to make the city better. I'm deeply concerned about the kind of city my kids will inherit. I have a 9-year-old and 11-year-old downstairs in the basement playing Fortnite, trying to be quiet while we go through this. And I hope that the city they inherit embraces them as the way that Portland embraced me, and I hope they will love Portland to the degree that I love Portland. That's why when I'm on city council, my top concern will frankly be a new concern. We face an enormous economic challenge because of this COVID crisis. I view my number one job is to help the city heal from this trauma. And then after that, we have the classic Portland issues that I want to help the city make progress on. You know, I think I have some smart ideas about reducing homelessness, bringing more affordable housing to the city. And I think we need to do fundamental reform. You know, I'm in this because I think that representation matters. That's why I want to change the way we elect members of city council. Right now, we all run at large. And one of the things I hear out on the campaign trail is that Portlanders who tell me that their views are not represented in city council. That's why I think we should begin to elect members of city council through neighborhood-based electoral districts. We are all aware of the siloing in our city government, where our left hand of policy doesn't know what our right hand is doing. That's why I will direct the city council to hire a city manager to coordinate services across different programs. And I think most importantly, I want to change the tone of Portland politics. I think for too long, our politics have been divisive and demoralizing. I've never seen my neighbors as disappointed in the leadership we have in City Hall as we have today. I don't think that's the Portland that certainly isn't the Portland I grew up with. It's not the Portland I want my kids to inherit. When I'm on City Council, I will be a transparent and constructive policymaker. I'm evidence-based, and I believe in bringing everybody to the table, and I look forward to listening to you and working with you to build a better city.
Great, thank you. So let's go straight to the biggest issue facing us, and that is the coronavirus pandemic, which has been both a public health and an economic crisis. And I guess first, let's start off with Chloe. What would you, as a city councilor now, but also if you're reelected, what would you do to help Portland's recovery in the coming months?
Well, that's a complicated question. How long do I have? Couple minutes?
Yeah, we're not timing it, but I'll jump in if it's...
Okay, yeah. I'll just start by talking about what I have been doing. Of course, my first responsibility is to my bureaus, so working closely with them to come up with a strategy for how we're going to weather pretty significant budget cuts, starting with hiring freezes, cutting any unnecessary spending, cost-saving strategies, and so on. My first thought as this crisis evolved was, how are we going to keep people housed? So I began calling for an eviction moratorium for the duration of the crisis, which we were able to pass very quickly. It's a stopgap measure. It is not enough. It's not a viable solution for many renters as it stands, or for landlords. So we're still working diligently on that issue. How do we keep tenants and homeowners and business owners from losing their housing and their businesses? The areas that, you know, are systemic failures as a city, as a state, and as a country are on full display. And some of the areas that I'm very focused on locally, besides working with our small business community and focusing on housing, are the fact that the city really needs a central communications office. It's challenging on good days to get timely, vital information out to the public. And in the midst of this crisis, that's become even clearer. We need centrally administrated accommodations for people with disabilities and people who need language supports. That's something that I've been lobbying for over 3 years. Accommodations are inconsistent across the city, and we really need to ensure that our most vulnerable community members have access to vital information. We need a preparedness and resiliency strategy, and that is another thing I've been working on since being assigned civic life. We have been slowly working toward a joint effort with PBEM and the Fire Bureau, bringing in our neighborhood associations and the neighborhood emergency teams to work together to come up with a preparedness and resiliency strategy. Of course, we had an earthquake in mind, not a viral pandemic, so this has really opened our eyes to the ways that we need to organize and prepare in the future. We need to close the digital divide, which I feel very lucky for the efforts that PPS is making to get computers out to students and get households connected to the internet, but we know that somewhere upwards of 95,000 Portlanders don't have home access to internet, and it's vital that they do, because this is the way people are getting information primarily, and it's also an important way to stay connected. And finally, after the crisis has abated, we need to address all the ways that we are failing as a society. We need living wage jobs. We need universal health care. We need stronger worker protections so people don't have to go to work sick out of fear for losing their jobs. We need stronger tenant rights. We need deep investment in affordable housing and homelessness. And we need to create a real social safety net so that we are much better prepared for the next crisis.
Great. And then kind of keeping with the same order, Mingus, if you wouldn't mind going next, would you like me to repeat the question? It's basically, what would you do as a city councilor to help Portland's recovery in the coming months?
Sure. Well, I look at this problem as both a public health crisis and an economic crisis. I sure hope that by the time I take office, we will be past the public health crisis, but we will still face an economic crisis unlike anything Portland has seen for nearly a century. I have a couple of short-term goals that I hope to make real. Number one is I hope no one loses their housing as a result of this economic crisis that we are about to face. So, and that stands for both renters and homeowners. So I support the ban on evictions, and I will lobby the state and federal government to come up with policies that provide some form of mortgage relief. Also, I think one of the things that the city council needs to do right now is to become expert at anticipating the needs of Portlanders, especially the financial needs of Portlanders, and then we need to lobby the federal and state government for adequate aid to meet those needs. This problem is much bigger than something that the city council can deal with it by itself. This is an all hands on deck situation. This is literally what the federal government is for. Clearly, one of the things we need to do is to educate the federal government about the needs of Portlanders, lobby hard for that. And when that aid comes in, I expect the city of Portland to play an important role in actually getting that aid into the hands of Portlanders. So we have to be sure that we build out those programs effectively. And then, of course, I think we need to acknowledge and face the reality that there will be budget cuts as a result of the recession that we are heading into. So we need to, number one, right now, I think, adopt a hiring freeze. I think we need to take a look at which, large capital projects that we can delay until we can afford to actually do them. And we need to also take a look at what our fundamental priorities are in terms of serving Portlanders. We will be coming back to a different city than the one we left a month ago. Our needs will be different, and we're going to have to reinvent government in order to meet those needs. And I look forward to offering the leadership and the partnership to help Portland, the federal authorities and state authorities figure out how to make all this work.
Okay. And Sam, how about you? What would you as a city councilor do to help Portland's recovery? You know what? I think you're still muted right now.
Still muted, Sam.
Thanks for the question. This is really a situation of not just what needs to be done, but how it needs to be done and how to get it done. I think that Portland has a lot of data it's sitting on, and a lot of people right now that can mine that data to fine-tune the efforts of the city, to prioritize the efforts. We're not gonna get enough money from the federal government or state government. I hope I'm wrong, but if that's true, we want to make sure that we're advocating to the state and federal government, the county and metro, from a fact-based way, and what resources we do bring, that we're prioritizing them in the right way. I mentioned earlier that I overcut the budget to fund more external services for those being hit hardest in the Great Recession. I would do that again. For example, my 2009 budget, we overcut so that we could increase houselessness and affordable housing services, mental health services by 30%. And we continue to do that all 4 years of the recession. I think the city government needs, and 56% of those cuts in 2009 were from middle management and administrative services. Not that those parts of the government aren't important, they're just not as important as helping people about to get kicked out of their houses or expanding shelter for people that are houseless. So mining data, focusing the city's efforts. If I was there, as I did in the past, I would have organized a virtual meeting with our federal delegation and have regular check-ins with them. We have some members of Congress in the U.S. House that have influential positions, and not everything about the federal rescue plans are going well. For example, the Paycheck Protection Act, if you talk to small businesses, if you take that, you have to show that you're going to have your full slate of employees in 8 weeks. And that's just not realistic for a lot of service businesses like restaurants, especially, and stores. We need our city council on the Zoom talking to our delegation because, for example, Senator Wyden has great standing and can do a lot about that. That's just one example. Unemployment benefits have not been rolling out as quickly, the enhanced unemployment benefits as well. So these are things that I would also do with the state delegation. I know that the mayor, who I think is doing a good job, is in constant contact with the governor and works closely with Chair Kafori. But we need to put the pressure on for a special session to fix this glitch that's going to cost Multnomah County upwards of $100 million. That would be devastating to local government services if we don't fix that. And that has to be, torches on the state capitol to make that special session. If only they did that, and there's plenty they could do in terms of reforms to business insurance that are screwing over small businesses. The other thing is with Metro. I hope that the Here Together bond measure, Houseless Homeless Services bond measure passes, but it's going to be 6 to 12 months before any money starts coming in. And I propose that if it passes, that the county or the city or Metro take some debt out, which debt is very cheap right now, a prudent amount, and we've got lots of financial folks who know how to do that, so that we can have money immediately to help people stay in their homes. We can't wait 6 to 12 months and have thousands of people lose their home. We need rent vouchers right now. The other thing is, I'm talking about, these are early things that need to be done. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on public, private, nonprofit, affordable housing. And yet a lot of them operate on such a thin margin that they can be in default after 3 months of not paying their full mortgage. That's something that the city needs to bring them together and figure out solutions like we did in '08. And the last thing I'll say is, I've got planks up today about, also mobilizing Portlanders right now as the pandemic ebbs. And we've got a lot of people, unfortunately, out of work, but mobilizing that free volunteers, kind of like Vera Katz did in 1995 to build the wall on the Willamette, and mobilizing them to build 500 units of what has turned out to be the very successful small house village cluster concept. Here in Kenton, the Portland Women's Village is doing great in terms of helping people stabilize their lives. And Seattle has leaned into this mightily, the mayor, and I want to give Portlanders something to do on a key issue while they have the time to do it, and that's to get people housed. So those are a few ideas.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. I'm probably going to get a little bit more aggressive about keeping answers short, just so you know. But I guess, Mingus, you would be first with this. And you kind of referred to this, actually. With lower tax revenue, the city will be hard-pressed to provide the same array of programs and level of service that it does now. What should the city's mission and philosophy be in determining what gets funding and what doesn't? And if you could be as specific as you can about what's a priority and what gets delayed.
Sure. I think we have to focus in on basics and the city's core mission. For me, the city's core mission is to, protect the lives and safety of Portland residents, and also I think protect the dignity of Portland residents. And we also have to create a ladder for digging out of this economic crisis that we are about to enter into. So that means things like, let's make sure that we don't undermine our public safety systems, and let's make sure that livability remains a strong, be a strong theme throughout the services that we need. And we also need to meet the unmet needs of Portlanders right now. We know many of us are going to go many months without a paycheck. Many of us are going to have difficulty meeting rent and mortgages. That's why I want to see us increase the amount of funding we have for emergency rental assistance. And we also have to, sow seeds for the future. So I want to make sure that we are still doing the kind of investments which, promote growth. Businesses will eventually come back to Portland stronger and more vibrant than ever, but I want to be sure that, we've laid the infrastructure for our rebirth.
Is there an area or a program or something that, comes to mind that would be a lower priority that would have to wait? I would have to take a look at that now. I'm not running for city government to, dismantle the city. So I think all the work that, our 24 bureaus do are important. This is rather more an issue of adjusting our priorities. So today I can't offer a specific list of programs that I would cut. I can tell you the things that will be at the top of my list, which are, making sure that we're funding the recovery efforts, making sure that we fund public safety, and making sure that we fund public dignity. And Sam, how about you? What should guide the city in terms of determining what gets funding and what doesn't, with specifics about priorities? And you know what? You're still muted.
Thank you. I'm terrible at that. As I mentioned before, looking at middle management and looking at administrative services, again, not that they're not valuable, it's just they're not as valuable as frontline services for the city. And again, I would overcut so that we can invest in real dollars into services, external services that are helping Portland's most vulnerable. Beyond that, I would look at the oldest programs. So what I did is we had the city submit on a program by program basis, so not a bureau by bureau basis. And we had criteria that included elements such as, is it help with those being impacted? Does this program help with those being impacted directly by the recession? Is it a life safety issue that the city is responsible for? Is it something that could be furloughed and the employees put in another program temporarily, and when times get better, potentially bring it back? We also, looked at reducing enforcement of certain regulations that freed up time and allowed us to trim staff back. For example, sandwich board signs in the city is just a small example that we stopped enforcing that regulation for a while so we could cut back on staff in the Bureau of Development Services that doesn't get a lot of general fund, but we had to balance the budget even there. So going through everything at a programmatic level against a criteria of helping externally, again, like any organization that's going through a trauma like this of cutting their budget, and the care and feeding of and the protection of city employees is really important. They're really important. But in times like this, we have to double down on our external mission and put as much resources out the door and cut accordingly or save accordingly to which programs in the city come closest to meeting that immediate requirement.
And Chloe, what do you think should be the city's mission or philosophy in determining what gets funded and what doesn't, with specifics about priorities?
So currently our goals are to preserve vital services and attempt to minimize the impact to workers. I actually had to deal with the dramatic cuts to BDS as the commissioner in charge starting in 2017. And I can tell you that those deep cuts made it extraordinarily hard for us to keep up with the huge demand on the Bureau during a development boom. So while I absolutely recognize that we are going to have to furlough employees, we're going to have to lay people off, we are going to have to eliminate inefficiencies and redundancies and get a lot better at collaborating and sharing across bureaus, I am going to be focused on preserving as many jobs as we can. I would just like to take a minute to assure you and to assure the public that the council is in routine contact with the county, with Metro, with state, and with our federal delegation. I'm working with our federal delegation primarily on small business relief and housing. With Metro, the conversations have centered largely around facilities. With the state, my focus has been on housing and worker relief. And with the county, the city is doing amazing work with the Joint Volunteer Information Center. I've actually redeployed my policy director to ECC to work with the Volunteer Information Center. And there's a web page. The URL is unfortunately way too long, but please Google Multnomah County COVID volunteer donate. And you'll find a site where you can sign up to volunteer, you can donate personal protective equipment, and you can also, if you're an organization, make requests for donations. So that work is well underway. The city last week authorized access to a $100 million line of credit, which of course we're going to be very cautious about utilizing and just use it for kind of short-term bridge funding, but that money is there as well. You want specifics. I mean, I'm in a different position as the other guests today in that I actually oversee these bureaus, and I can't, I'm not going to share things today that potentially impact my bureaus and my workers without sharing it with them first. So what I can tell you today is that we're in conversations with the unions around foregoing COLA, foregoing merit pay and step increases. We're looking at allowing people to voluntarily reduce their hours. And we're looking further down the line at furloughs and layoffs. And we're looking at those with an equity lens, because I'm very concerned about losing ground on the important equity work we've done at the city over the last several years. So we're at risk if we simply cut the newest workers or people in entry-level positions of losing a lot of the diversity in city staff. So that is another thing that we're carefully considering.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Amy or Laura or Therese, does someone want to jump in?
Not me, thank you. I'll jump in. Over the past month, Portland's arts and cultural scene has gone from extremely vibrant to, just completely standing still. Where would you rank in terms of, triaging efforts to assist the arts and cultural scene? And do you have any specific thoughts on how you would do so?
Who do you want to start with?
Oh, sorry, I lost track. Who went first the last time? Was that Mingus last time? So then I think it's Sam.
Yeah, so in my advocacy with the delegation, it was to include nonprofits in the benefits that were being discussed in the Senate and then in the House as part of the rescue package. An improved Paycheck Protection Act can also apply to nonprofits, so that was very helpful. But again, how realistic that they can keep on their full contingent of employees, have them on full contingent of employees in 8 weeks, which is required right now, is, I don't think, realistic. And it puts the boards of these nonprofits and for-profit galleries, as you know, in legal jeopardy. And I appreciate the commissioner talking about the conversations and the context that the city is having with a whole host of people. It allows me to clarify that I'd like the city to host public Zoom meetings with our delegation so that they don't just hear from people like us, but they hear the desperation of folks in the arts and culture community, rest of the nonprofit community, and also in the for-profit arts and culture community. I think, the folks at PNCA, had a tough budget to begin with. It's made tougher by this, so I have a lot of concern about them and want to make sure that there's more funding, and the criteria for funding education institutions will allow for PNCA to get some of that funding as well. I think that, I've tried to use my little bully pulpit to encourage people to give to the artist fund that's been created. I'd like to see the city give some additional money to the artist fund. And to clarify that artists are also eligible for the gig worker. If they're not a sole proprietor officially, that if they're not getting, 1199s, that at least they be considered as gig workers explicitly and are qualified for benefits for that, which right now I'm encouraging them to apply, but it's not clear whether or not they'll get any of sort of the gig worker unemployment benefits. So there's, again, this continuing need to be in front of our delegation, which has good standing back in Washington, D.C., but also to help get the public in front of our delegation and in front of the leadership of the state on these issues. I'd like to see in the special session of the legislature that there's additional money given to the Oregon Arts Commission, which has come forward with some money. I'd like to find more to keep these valuable treasures, what is part of the city's soul, still up and running. Thanks for the question.
And Chloe?
Yes, thank you. Well, I have the arts portfolio. In my portfolio, I come from the arts community, and I lived through the recession along with the rest of the community, and I'm very fearful for the potential impacts to our arts and culture landscape. Already a delicate ecosystem on a good day. As a country, we underinvest in the arts. As a city, we underinvest in the arts. One of the many sad realities of this crisis is that this year I was finally poised to get full funding for what we wanted to do with RAC. We were working on advancing reforms to the arts tax that would deliver relief to low-income households while making the tax progressive and actually bringing in more revenue. Of course, those things are not happening exactly as planned. I have been focused on the segment of our arts community that was the first to be hit, will be among the hardest hit, and will be among the last to reopen, and those are our performance venues. We may not see large-scale gatherings for a year. I hate to say this out loud, but it's the reality that we're going to have to start adjusting to. And we have to figure out how we're going to help these businesses, their employees, and performers weather the storm. So I'm in direct contact with a coalition of over 40 local venues and liaising between them and primarily our federal delegation working on that. I'm very appreciative of Senator Wyden's unemployment reforms. I hope that we can improve upon them and make them permanent moving forward. They were extremely outdated and don't reflect the reality of many American workers who are independent contractors, gig economy workers, part-time, and so on. So I am hopeful in this next relief package we'll see even stronger protections for them. It's, again, our failures are on full display, and we haven't done enough as a community to support our arts and culture industries, and we're going to have to do a lot of creative footwork to help them get through this.
And Mingus, how about you in terms of possible ideas to help support the arts community?
Sure. I think this is a very important question. I'm a champion of the arts. Arts are incredibly important in Portland. They literally define who we are. So yes, of course, we need to continue our investments in the arts. And I also think Commissioner Daly is correct. We are not going to go back to the same city that we left a month ago. Big venues that drew people together to celebrate the arts. That may not happen for a while, which I view as an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to reinvent how the arts work for this moment. And that's kind of what art does. We need art more now than we ever have. One of the sort of corrosive things about this moment is that in the midst of a crisis, we are atomized in our own homes. Whereas in a crisis, I think Portlanders like to typically come together and support each other and just kind of process what's happening to us. And it's unfortunate that we can't do that, or now we do it mediated through Zoom. But the arts are part of the answer here. One of the things I want to do is to take a look at our funding for the arts at a macro level. One of the things I want to do when I'm on City Council is to fix the arts tax. I support that program, but we have a big problem with collection. I'd like to work with the state around maybe getting the arts tax on our state income tax form so people can fill it out that way instead of searching around for that envelope in the pile of mail on your kitchen table. And also, once this is over and we move on to the next phase, I will be a champion of the arts on City Council. I'll remind people why they matter, and I'll also advocate and reach out to the private sector and corporations and ask them to support the arts too, especially in the schools and in our community.
Great, thank you. I think because there are definitely some specific questions we really want to get to, there's going to be a few questions that are directed specifically at one person or another. Laura, do you want to go first?
Yes, am I going to make sure? Okay, good, I'm off mute. Yes, I wanted to direct this to Sam. During the last time you ran for office, you made a very questionable decision in terms of the relationship you formed with an 18-year-old, and then you lied about it during the early stages of your campaign for mayor. You also asked Bo Breedlove to lie about it. What did you learn from that, and why should voters trust your judgment?
Mike, Sam.
Yeah, that was a mistake, no question about it. And I learned a lot. I learned how important it is to, to take care of myself. And I didn't lead a balanced life. I also did a lot of introspection on why that happened, why I made that mistake, and learned humility. Learn to ask others for feedback, always partnership oriented, but even more so. Because of that, it definitely made me a better person, a more compassionate person, and it made me a better public servant. I think Portlanders are fair-minded people. As you know, that was investigated, no legal wrongdoing found. Stupid, but legal. And I began my term with 60% of Portlanders feeling that the city was going in the right direction, and ended my term with 60% of people who thought that the city was going in the right direction. My approval rating at the end of my term was 54%, which was very strong, especially considering having gone through all the cuts I had to make and everything we had to do with the recession. So when I also had the opportunity in terms of my working with the City Club to turn it around and to make it more diverse and leaving it in good financial shape, went on to DC, worked for an environmental think tank, and further sort of grew as an individual, traveling around the world and seeing folks in much, much more desperate straits than we are, both appreciating Portland and appreciating my life, but also feeling the need to rejoin public service, at least attempt to in the elected reign, and bring those personal lessons, lessons gleaned from being out of public office and in public office to this job, to this race and potentially job.
So I'd like to follow up on that, because you were talking about just the approval rating you had at the end of your term. At the same time, in terms of some of the unusual financing strategies that you turned to support your priorities, some of the consequences of those weren't known at the time. So for instance, the arts tax, where the 5% administrative cost was just fantasy. You back the decision to use money Portlanders pay for their water to go to pet projects. And under your management, the city's Transportation Bureau took on a wide range of projects while ignoring its obligation to fund basic street maintenance, something that we're paying for now in a separate tax. So I guess what would you say to people who are concerned about what your expansive view of how to use tax dollars, and whether you're going to be making right decisions that fund what needs to be funded?
Well, the arts tax, I wouldn't have let it go on for as long as it did. Every new tax has to be recalibrated after it's passed. The Portland Clean Energy Fund just went through that. The regional Here Together bond measure will likely do that. That's why you pass them not as charter amendments, but you pass them as ordinances so that you can make those amendments and the fine tuning for them. The goal of and so I would have and have already proposed, similar to the Commissioner Eudaly, to make changes to make it more progressive in terms of the arts tax. So those are the kinds of things I will come back to and get to revisit. I have the opportunity now to go back and revisit decisions we made in the past and come at that with experienced, fresh eyes. And I intend to do that. I did that while I was in office. One of the first things I tackled was lowering the taxes on Portland small businesses. My first effort failed at the City Council, recalibrated, came back, and about 4 years later, did another recalibration of it. I think that kind of, you pass the best you can, you get the best you can passed, and then you improve upon it. That's been my approach to governance to date, and I would continue that if I'm back on the City Council.
Okay, Chloe, I've got a question for you. Your proposal for rewriting city code around civic engagement has been controversial, to put it mildly. Neighborhood associations vehemently opposed it. Your fellow city council members didn't seem to get on board either. At the same time, there were some emails that came out from you and your policy advisor that reflected a certain amount of scorn for constituents as well as your colleagues. Can you kind of talk about what happened? Do you regret anything about your handling of it, and how will that inform any efforts to move forward?
Sure. Well, first I want to say we did have several neighborhood associations support code change, as well as a very impressive coalition of community organizations and advocates. And you can find that on the Change the Code PDX website. I think scorn is a fairly harsh word. Are you referring to the text messages?
That, as well as the email that you sent to fellow commissioners.
So just to put that in context, that exchange had nothing to do with code change or neighborhood associations. That exchange happened during a council item that was changing some addresses in Southwest Portland that begin with those with zeros that were making it difficult for emergency services to find people's homes. And we were very surprised by the opposition that came out to changing those addresses. And it was just one of those moments in council where you think we are absolutely doing the right thing. We are literally trying to save lives, but people are still so attached to their addresses and resistant to change. And so that's the context of that. The letter that came out, or the email that came out from me was unfortunate. I've apologized to Commissioner Fritz, and we have moved on a long time ago and worked collaboratively on other projects. I was out of town, and I was hearing from staff that a couple of my colleagues were upset that they were hearing from advocates in favor of code change. And I think anyone could understand, after working long and hard on that project and seeing a misinformation campaign mobilize in the middle of it before the proposals were even made, before I had an opportunity to consider what code change committee was recommending, was very frustrating. And I couldn't understand why my colleagues wouldn't want to hear from advocates, those advocates being among the very communities that we claim to want to better serve. To characterize it as scorn or a threat, which is how it was stated in the media, I think is a little histrionic. So what I would do differently. Look, the work that we've done at Civic Life was in direct response to a very critical audit that was performed in 2016. It came out shortly after I took over the Bureau. We have made significant strides towards correcting the issues highlighted in that audit. The work on code change is the result of a 30-year conversation about the lack of diversity in our neighborhood associations. I didn't make up this problem. I didn't invent the solution. And in fact, I didn't even have a chance to weigh in with my opinion before having to respond to this misinformation campaign in the community. Neighborhood associations are a legitimate way to organize community. I have never set out to dismantle them, to de-recognize them. The fact is, half of them are currently out of compliance with the standards that they want largely to keep in place. And my only ability to make them comply is to de-recognize them. So if I really wanted to dismantle the neighborhood association system, it would be pretty easy. I would de-recognize them. But the fact is, I deeply care about civic engagement. I see the importance of neighborhood associations, and I want to make the network bigger and better. Neighborhood associations are basically mutual aid or mutual benefit societies, and they do really great work in their neighborhoods. They also provide valuable input to the city on projects and policies. However, because we have a fraction of 1% of Portlanders participating in their neighborhood associations, and because the membership of the neighborhood associations don't represent the full diversity of our community, if we as a city take civic engagement seriously, we cannot continue to only recognize and rely on neighborhood associations for when we need to conduct public engagement. So what code change was really about is recognizing the different ways that people identify and organize and elevating those voices to the same level as neighborhood associations.
Right. I believe that the concern was largely that they would be, their status would be, I guess that the code change would take away that automatic status that neighborhood associations have, as opposed to kind of increasing the number of associations that have, or organizations that have that direct link or that direct, I guess, status within kind of policy making, that it would be clear about who would be getting those kinds of, who would be getting that kind of status.
Sure, that was a concern that I heard. It was not based on the reality of my intent. And when I heard it, I directed the Bureau to put language back in the code, specifically acknowledging neighborhood associations and stating that there would not be a change in the short term. We have a couple other important conversations we need to have alongside this one. We need to talk about our neighborhood coalition structure and whether that's a cost-effective and efficient way to run our neighborhood associations. We need to conduct a citywide inventory of all of the ways that our various bureaus, the way code change touches our various bureaus, and what a full reform of that would look like. We were set to advance code change right about now. We're putting it off because people simply can't engage in the way that they have come to expect. And I don't want or need to force this through in the middle of a crisis. What I am doing is turning my attention to an alternative way to engage thousands and thousands of more Portlanders, and that is setting up a civic engagement digital platform. I'm working up the funding for it right now, very excited about it, and that is a way that the city could present projects and policies to the public for feedback. We can receive citizens' initiatives. Community members can find other people in the community who share their interests in burning issues and collaborate with them. We can recruit volunteers for a variety of areas we need community support in. And we will also be able to set up a participatory budgeting process, which I'm very excited about. I had it nailed down in this last budget, and it's one of many things that we're going to have to forego as we cut every non-essential thing that we can. So I hope I've answered your question.
I think so.
I appreciate the opportunity to get to talk about it, because there's been a lot of misrepresentation and misinformation about my intent. And oh, and my computer is dying and my lights are going out. That's okay. All right.
Okay, I have another question for Mingus that I'm hoping to get you real quick, and that's just in terms of both Sam and Chloe are known players in Portland. You know, they've got strong supporters, a strong supporter base, as well as some vocal critics as well.
Yeah.
You're not as well known to Portland, and you know, some of your responses in the questionnaire and today lack a certain amount of specificity. So I guess I'm wondering, you know, real briefly, since our hour's up, but you know, can you talk about like what is it that you what is it that you would bring to City Council? What is it that what concrete changes would people see as a result of having you on the City Council?
Sure. I think we would see a fundamental change in the style of leadership. I'm evidence-based, I'm constructive, I listen to people. I will push for fundamental change in the way City Hall is organized. Again, I point to the city manager and changing the way that we will elect members of City Council. I also believe that it's important to defend, frankly, the neighborhood association system. I was very disappointed to hear the commissioner say that she was thinking about dismantling the coalition offices. I think the neighborhood association system and the coalitions play an important role.
Once again, misrepresentation of what I said.
Well, Commissioner Eudaly, this thing is taped, so I think, and we're in a room full of journalists, I think they can go back and revisit what you said and what you didn't say.
Yeah, that's what you said last time, Mingus, but you continue to misrepresent my words in the moment. I did not say we needed to dismantle the neighborhood coalition system, but the fact is, we are paying 6 executive directors to oversee 15 employees. You wouldn't find that anywhere else in the city. It is incredibly expensive and inefficient way to run the coalitions. And the fact is, if we did overhaul them, we could potentially have millions of more dollars pushed out to neighborhood associations and community grants through the small grants.
Okay, so I think we are in a room with about at least 4 or 5 journalists. I think we can look at your statement and see whether or not that counts as an indicator that you are looking at getting rid of the coalition offices. I think that's what I heard. And I think that you can clarify this with the journalists maybe after this meeting. The thing that I want to emphasize is that I'm constructive, I'm evidence-based, I'm not ideologically driven. I'm in this for all the right reasons. You know, I love Portland, and I'm trying to leave a city that our kids can be proud of and embrace. And if that's something that you know, voters want, then I think I will be the candidate for them, or at least I hope to be.
Okay, thank you. I know it's late, but I just want to see if there's, if any of the other edit board members had a quick, if something, the question that they want to leave on.
I guess one question that we've had and we've strongly editorialized in the past, in terms of changing the organization of our government in City of Portland, we recognize that, of course, this is a charter issue, but it also seems something that could be pushed off, considering that this recovery could go for 1 to 2 years, and leaders might decide that this isn't the right time to overhaul government. I'm just curious, would you stand by this plan to change Portland's city government, despite where we are today? And
Yes, I think this is more important today than ever. One of the reasons to do this is to coordinate services across bureaus. We're famously bad at doing this as we head into, both trying to manage a public health crisis and an economic crisis. It's never been more important that, our different arms of city government work together. So yes, this is a thing that we cannot put off.
Sam?
So I think we should pursue with research. What I've said is, having been through a couple of these electoral efforts, is that we should adopt, as a starting point for the discussion, we should adopt the Multnomah County form of government, which gives you the executive chair, mayor, gives you a COO, city manager, and then has board members elected by districts. They have 5. I think we need more than 5. And I say that especially in this sort of pandemic era where people are going to feel more uncertain. And I've just seen these things go to the ballot, and charters are have inherently difficult language. So I think going with something that people know locally, that they generally embrace, in terms of a mayor, city manager, a legislative approach to reform. That's what I'm proposing. Again, how I think we should proceed forward. You can't do an exact graft. You have to make some obvious sort of changes, but I think it is the most viable. But I also think before we go to the ballot, the practical answer to your question is we need to poll to see whether it's the right time to actually go to the ballot. If people are not in the mood, then we shouldn't do it. But I think we should start that work right away and be ready, because someday, if not now, and I would support it, but if someday they will be ready.
And Chloe?
Well, I'm looking forward to the charter review process. I am absolutely open to and supportive of changing our form of city government. However, I think it would be a terrible idea to try to do that in the midst of this crisis or in the early days of the recovery. The fact is, it will take months, possibly years, even after the decision is made to restructure our government. And in the meantime, there's a lot we can do to be more collaborative, to be more effective and efficient. And I also just want to put a plug in there for ranked choice voting, which is something that would be much easier to implement in the shorter term and would result in elections that are much more reflective of our whole community. The reality is we don't have a single minority-majority district in Portland anymore, and so districts will not necessarily deliver more diverse candidates or more diverse council. And I'm also concerned about what districts mean for renters who don't necessarily have a choice of what district they live in or continue to live in if they're displaced from their housing. So it's a big conversation. There's a lot of details to work out. This is the only form of city government I've ever known because I've lived here my entire adult life. But I am not strongly attached to it. I am for change and reform when it makes sense.
Thank you all so much for your time today. This was a great conversation, really interesting, and I appreciate all the time and the thought you put into this. We'll be coming out with our endorsements probably towards the end of the month or beginning of May. And if we need anything more, we'll follow up with you. But again, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you.
day,
Thank
everybody.
you all. Have a
Thank
good
you.
day.
Take care.
Bye.